I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. The resolution before us is an important measure to set the record straight on the atrocities suffered by the Armenian people at the hands of the Ottoman Empire in the early 20th century. We know what happened in this dark period of history. Between 1915 and 1923, 1.5 million Armenians were murdered. That's 1.5 million. This was a genocide, and it's important that we call this crime what it was. Many American elected officials, diplomats, and institutions have rightly recognized these atrocities as a genocide, including America's ambassador to the Ottoman Empire at the time, Henry Morgenthau, and later President Ronald Reagan. It's time that we set the record straight. Only by shining a light on the darkest parts of our history can we learn to not repeat them. And properly acknowledging what has occurred is a necessary step in achieving some measure of justice for the victims. House Resolution 296 sticks to the historical facts. It is a good, common-sense measure with broad bipartisan support. I want to thank Mr. Schiff, the resolution's author, as well as Chairman McGovern, Ms. Eshoo, Ms. Spire, Mr. Pallone, Mr. Bilirakis, Mr. Smith, and the other bipartisan champions of this issue for their persistent, steadfast pursuit of recognition for the suffering the Armenian people endured. I strongly support advancing this resolution to consideration by the full House. By doing so, we put Congress on the right side of history, properly acknowledging and condemning this horrific genocide. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony, and I now recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Let me associate my remarks with Chairman Engel. I think he made it very clear what we're talking about. This resolution has been around for over 2 decades. Twice it almost came to the floor in the year 2000 and again in the year 2007. Mr. Rovdanovich was the prime sponsor back in 2000. It was a bipartisan. David Bonner was the co-sponsor, and now it's flipped, and of course there's a Democrat and Republican lead on it this time. I've chaired 2 congressional hearings on the Armenian Genocide in the year 2000. I had a very, very long hearing. We heard from scholars, the State Department. We heard from the authors of the resolution at the time. And I have to tell you, in preparation for it, I went and read Morgenthau's book. He was our ambassador during the time of the genocide. He was our ambassador to the Ottoman Empire. And it was a very persuasive case the term had not yet been coined, genocide, but it was a genocide. The willful, massive destruction of a people. The Genocide Convention, of course, says the destruction in whole or in part. The attempt here was the whole of the Armenian people. About 1.5 million people were slaughtered, as Chairman Elliot Engel just said a moment ago. About 500,000 were put to flight, exiled forcibly, and it is one of the worst things. When Adolf Hitler was contemplating his cruelty and atrocities, he said, "Who remembers the Armenians?" Raphael Lemkin, when he coined the actual phrase of genocide, he said, "It's like what the Germans did to the Jews, and it's what the Turks did to the Armenians." This resolution is a long time in coming. It's never a good time. I remember when the legislation was coming up in the House, Sandy Berger, then the National Security Advisor, admonished our speaker then to not bring it to the floor. It was all ready to go, and it never had its vote. And that would have been, of course, Dennis Hastert that pulled the bill. Ditto again in 2007. This time it was the Bush administration that didn't want it to come to the floor, and it didn't. There's never a good time with Turkey to take this up. Maybe this isn't the best, who knows, but it's never a good time, and they get away. They have a very well-financed lobby effort, both on Capitol Hill and elsewhere, that they employ to try to diminish the possibility. They try to just say this was just part of war. No, it wasn't. This was a deliberate attempt to eviscerate the Armenians from the face of the earth. And finally, my hope is that this resolution will pass. It is sent to the Congress, but it would put the House on record 49 states, including just about everybody here at the table, and 28 countries have recognized the Armenian Genocide. It's about time we did so as well.
Thank you for your testimony. I now turn to Mr. Perlmutter for any questions. We're going to committee questions first.
I worry about the Kurds.
Thank you. I now turn to our ranking member, Mr. Cole, for any questions that he may have.
Just a couple questions, and I think you probably both answered them, but I just want to get them on the record. Obviously, in this particular case, this piece of legislation is coming without a hearing this time around. I just want to say, do you think that was necessary in any way or advisable? Would the hearing have been a useful thing to have had? Mr. Chairman, I'll ask you first, and I'd ask the ranking member.
Well, we didn't think that the hearing was necessary, Mr. Cole, because we, in previous years, have had hearings on this issue, and I think it's pretty straightforward in that we all know what happened and really what was done. I think that this is an important time to do it, given what's happening now with in the Middle East, involving Turkey, quite frankly, and I think that for many, many years, many of us, if not all of us, have had our constituents come to see us to talk about the genocide. And so we thought that this was the right time for a number of reasons to offer it and to this time have it on the House floor. It's been very frustrating for me and for others that we would pass it out of the Foreign Affairs Committee and it would be held up and never brought to a vote on the floor from leadership in this Congress, a Democratic and Republican alike. Now we have the opportunity to do it. I think that based on what's happening around the world, people are more aware of it. And frankly, we're stating facts. We're not making things up. We're stating facts. So we thought that a hearing wasn't necessary. Everybody knows what happened. Everybody has a position on it. And so we didn't want to do anything that would delay it even further. Thank you.
I think hearings are always helpful. We've had 4 total. I've chaired 2 of them. The one by Tom Lantos, in 2007, was very eye-opening, as they all were. We always get some additional perspective. The one in 2015 that I chaired, the second one, was all about a century of denial by the Turks. It is, and I've met with Turkish leaders frequently on this issue, and I am, unlike the Nazi or the Germans after World War II, who came clean and admitted to the Holocaust and what had happened, and actually looked for reconciliation to some extent. That hasn't happened. And even the Pope made the point, the current Pope, Francis, that it's like a sore that doesn't ever heal if you get this denial campaign that is so aggressively pushed. So I do believe, and it is a denial. I mean, they threaten other countries. They threaten us. When I had the hearing in 2000, the ambassador from Turkey, because I had both sides at the table, the Armenians and the Turks, he threatened us with Incirlik. Frankly, with a friend like that in NATO, who needs enemies? Why can't they accept this for what it is? They massively slaughtered so many people. They raped the women as a matter of warfare, of genocide. And so I think they have to come clean. And I think if our country does this, if the European Union can do it, half of the EU countries can do it. If the Vatican can do it, why can't we? But I think a hearing is always helpful. Since this sense of the Congress does not, the way previous ones have said, calls on the president to very specifically have it in his annual, it talks about what we should say, but I think the other ones were more specific, so the administration might be more probable to opine on what their view is on the previous resolutions. This puts the House on record, and that's a good thing, to say that this genocide occurred, and we need to recognize it, and for the memories of those who died and the survivors. I have a few in my district that I've met with. We have in Brookdale Community College, there's a Holocaust and genocide memorial there, and it's unbelievable testimonies from people, including a number of Armenians, And I've gone to it, I've talked to people there. That's at Brookdale Community College in Monmouth County. So a hearing would have been good, but it's still, the record is clear on this.
Okay, one additional question. Obviously, in a variety of ways, and I think you both mentioned this in your testimony, we've been on record numerous times recognizing that this happened. Maybe not the United States House, but the United States government has. And to my friend, Mr. Smith, as he said, there's never a good time probably, because this always has consequences to it. But so you really feel strongly this is the right time, that this is a time that would make some sort of consequential difference, because there will be fallout, obviously, for this. There always is.
It's going always.
I think this time is as good as any. I think that if we don't move this bill 10 years from now, the Congress will still be arguing it 20 years from now. You know, this isn't something that we're alone. I have a whole list of countries and groups that have supported it. And if I can find it, I'd like to mention it because I think it's important. Thank you. Okay, well, we have many of our NATO allies have recognized it officially as a genocide, or have government bodies that have recognized the genocide, including France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Poland, Greece, the Netherlands, the UK, Spain, Belgium, Lithuania, Portugal, and others. Mentioned before, 49 out of 50 U.S. states have officially recognized the genocide. We've got to get after Mississippi to join the 50 states, the other 49 states. Overall, the majority of Europe and almost the entire Western Hemisphere has recognized it as a genocide. Resolutions endorsed by the Anti-Defamation League, the Armenian National Committee of America, ANCA, the Armenian Assembly of America in Defense of Christians, A Demand for Action, Hellenic American Leadership Council, American Hellenic Institute, and American Hellenic Educational Progressive Association, the American Jewish Committee, and the National Council of Churches. So it's been around, and we all know what it says and does, and I think it's an important time to do this. And I think waiting any further would just keep doing what we've been doing for the past 20 some odd years, and I think that's not helpful. I think this is the right time.
Mr. Smith?
Again, I think, as I said earlier, there's no best time for this. It was argued in 2007. No-fly zones, concerns about the situation that's adjacent to Turkey, where we needed access. But this is a historical fact, and that's what I found so...
You did mention there was something different, and I just want to ask this for clarification compared to what's been done previously. Could you just...
Well, annually, the president puts out a statement, no matter who's in the White House. And frankly, all of the presidents have made strong statements about massacres, forced deportations, but they are unwilling to cross the line and call it what it is, a genocide, because the Turks have made that the non-negotiable. And it seems to me that, a genocide, when you don't call it that, we had the same problem when people were unwilling to call what was happening in Darfur a genocide, the systematic elimination of people living in South Sudan, in Sudan, I should say. It matters, words do matter, and genocide is its own horrific crime in the lexicon of crimes, and it's the worst of the worst, and the Turks get that, which is why they've drawn a red line and said, you can't call it that. They want to just dismiss it, that somehow it was a firefight between the Armenians and the Turks, and it was not. It was a one-way slaughter. They rounded people up, they marched them in long death marches, very often bayoneting and killing, and raping women along the route in this attempt to, again, get rid of a group of people, an entire ethnicity that they found deplorable. And I think it's awful. But the difference between this one and previous ones, it calls for commemorates the Armenian Genocide through official recognition and remembrance. Previous sense of the Congresses went right to the heart of the president and what he says. Maybe it was done to try to just get the House on record and say clearly and unambiguously, this is a genocide. And And I think that's good.
Right.
That's a good step for us to take.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anybody, Ms. Scanlon?
Yes, next to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, there's a 22-foot tall statue commemorating the Armenian Genocide. That was dedicated in '76. The Philadelphia Historical Society has reams of materials on this historical fact. I've heard from so many constituents about this. They clearly think that now is too late. We should have done this before, so I look forward to voting for this. Thank you.
Anybody on this side? Mr. Woodall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to find out, the chairman said he wants that we need to set the record straight, and if all other nations can do it, we should be able to do it. Ranking member said we need to put the House on record. My question isn't, is now the right time? My question is, why wasn't it the right time when we did put the House on record in '75, when the president did put America on record in '81, when the House again went on record in '84? When is this going to be something that to accomplish? And I trust that our two witnesses, as much as I trust anyone in this institution on issues of foreign affairs. Is this something that we need to do every year to put the House on record? When are we going to have the record set straight? When are we going to have acknowledged the facts? And then when will we move on in partnership with both our Armenian friends and our Turkish friends? Mr. Chairman?
Yes, you raised some important points. First of all, the frustration in previous years, since I've been here, which is 30 years, we would pass a resolution in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and it would be held up, and we could never get it to the floor, under both Democrats and Republicans. Many of us are concerned about what's going on in various parts of the world. The Armenian Genocide was a genocide, and many of us are concerned with, frankly, genocide against others like the Kurds. It's happening right now, and Turkey is again in the thick of things. So I think if there was never a right time to release this before, now is certainly the right time with what's going on in Syria and Turkey and that region of the world. It's one thing to commemorate a Holocaust or genocide, but it's another thing to call it out so that these things will never happen again. And if they are happening, we're showing that the world is not going to sweep it under the rug again. So I think that this has an added, given what's happening in that part of the world now, I think that this has an added importance to it. And I'm not going to, pretend or deny and say, well, everything is separate. No, I've always supported this bill. I support it especially now because of what's going on in the region of the world where Turkey is. Years ago, when I visited Turkey and met with with Erdogan, who is now the leader of Turkey, and his minister, they were very, very thin-skinned about the Armenian Genocide. They asked me, that was the question they asked me. You're on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Of course, I wasn't chairman then, but you're on the Foreign Affairs Committee and you voted for the genocide. And they gave me, I'll never forget, 2 shopping bags full of books, which they were in Turkish, so I couldn't read them anyway. 4 books on one shopping bag and 4 in the other. And it went on and on and on, I guess, about their historical perspective of the Armenian Genocide. I still don't know what was in it. And I thought, what was that play in Shakespeare? Methinks the lady doth protest too much. I think the Turks protest too much. Turkish leadership protests too much because they know what we know, what Mr. Smith said, what Ms. Eshoo has said for many years. This was a genocide, clear and simple. And I'll be very proud when we pass it and follow the countries that are our allies that I mentioned before, and many of the EU countries who have done it. It's time that we acknowledge it. And I think This is not only the time to do it, it's the absolute right time to do it.
Like you said, it is bewildering in a way why the Turkish government in Ankara is so unwilling to recognize the fact. When I had that hearing in 2000, or chaired it, I should say, the Turkish ambassador who testified was just spinning lies and deception the entire time about what happened. We had scholars there as well who were correcting the record, and I'm glad they were there to provide that insight. So this disinformation campaign, aided and abetted by many lobbyists, some of our members, former members, who have gone into lobbying on behalf of the Turkish government, have been able to frustrate these efforts. And if you look at all the statements by the presidents over the years, they're strong statements. I mean, George Bush said this is about forced exile and the annihilation of 1.5 million Armenians. The Armenian government can live with that because it doesn't cross that important line of saying it was a genocide perpetrated by the Ottoman Empire. People like President Obama, when he was a senator, was a co-sponsor of the resolution, promised he would bring it up. 8 years later, it still he had not uttered those words of genocide. And the same could be said about the other on the Republican side as well. We did pass legislation in the mid-90s, an appropriations bill that talked about the survivors of the Armenian genocide, but it didn't have the clarity, didn't have the visibility, and I say again, it did not have the clarity of what this resolution, with its whereas clauses and the three clauses have. We want to be very clear. And then what happens every year when the president issues his statement, his statement in the future, there's always good, strong language. Now we would fully expect that it include the word genocide. And I think we need to look them in the eyes, they being in Ankara, and say, we're not kidding. Our allies, as has been said, Germany and other nations in the EU have done it, as have others throughout the world. Why can't we? As getting back to Tom Cole, there's never a good time. This may not be a good time, but there's never a good time. But we need to speak truth to power.
And if that is our goal, speaking truth to power, setting the record straight, properly acknowledging it, recognizing the chairman's frustration of 20 years, 30 years of resolutions that have not come to the floor, this is just a House resolution. This will not go to the United States Senate. This will not go to the President of the United States. So if this passes the House this week, have we done all of those things, spoken truth to power, set the record straight, acknowledged the facts, and thus we won't have another 30 years of members frustrated? Or is it your view that we need to do this each and every year until you get a recognition from the Turkish government that our facts are right and their story is wrong?
We could, but I think it's, the ball will clearly rest with the president and with the Senate to do likewise. But again, through Democrat and Republican administrations, even when promises were made, there were promises were not kept, including President Obama, who couldn't be clear. I remember when he made the statement, I said, at least that'll get done, in terms of this human rights agenda, and it didn't. And in 2015, as we had the 100th year of the beginning of this genocide, those who testified, and they were the prominent members of the Armenian community, were very, very frustrated that that had not happened. So this, again, asserts we can only do what we can do. My hope is that the others will say it is time. It's about time.
One final question. I actually quipped to my friend Dr. Burgess when we first began talking about Turkey and its conduct again, that knowing how these resolutions always get stalled, that this just may well be the time to bring up the Armenian Genocide resolution. Lo and behold, here it is on the desk. But to Mr. Perlmutter's point, to the chairman's point, we all worry about the Kurds. Is it the committee's view that this absolves us of those concerns? It absolutely sets the record straight about Armenia, but I'm still going to have the same concerns about the Kurds the day after this resolution is heard that I have the day before the resolution is heard. Are we also going to come back with a resolution that's equally forceful, that's equally demanding to protect our friends?
Yeah, we did. But there's also going to be a sanctions bill on the floor in response to Turkey's mistreatment of the Kurds. That's coming up under suspension this week.
Okay.
So,
the chairman points out quite rightly that we're going to have a punitive bill about Turkey's actions, and it is coming up this week. I remember when one of my predecessors as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Tom Lantos, got up in frustration because each time we were promised that the bill would move through, and each time the Turks in Ankara pushed it back. I think that this is the right time, and I don't think, while we know that a resolution isn't an end-all and be-all, it shows the world that we haven't forgotten those people, and in this very perilous time, we're not going to sit idly by and allow genocide to happen anywhere in the world. And there are other instances in the world. Mr. McGovern and I and others have worked on Rohingya people. It's important, I think, that we do this now, and we'll see what the future holds. But I'll be very, very proud of this body when we pass the resolution.
I thank the chairman. I yield back.
Let me just say, too, we can't control what Turkey says or whether Turkey will ever admit to this genocide. What we can control is what we say and what we do. And the fact that the United States of America, like the greatest, most powerful country in the world, has been reluctant and afraid to acknowledge a historical fact that a genocide occurred against Armenian people really is a stain on our human rights record. That's right. And if we're willing to, play along with Turkey to whitewash an awful chapter of their history, then that is noticed by others, but dictators and tyrants around the world when they decide to take action against civilians that maybe would just wait them out. They'll forget all about it. So this to me is. The question is not whether we should do this. The question is, why the hell haven't we done it? Any other questions on this side? Mr. Morelli.
No question. I just want to thank the chair, the ranking member, Ms. Eshoo. I did just want to note in 2002 and in 2008, I had the chance to vote for this in the New York State legislature, and as majority leader in 2015, we similarly passed a resolution on the 100th anniversary of the genocide. So this is something I think is high time for the House of Representatives to do, and I thank all of you for being here today.
Well, being an alumnus of the New York State Assembly with my colleague here, I'd say good for the Assembly.
Ms. Lesko.
Yes, I don't have a question. I just want to say I'm one of the original co-sponsors, and so I thank you for bringing this forward. I'll be supporting it.
That's wonderful. Ms. Shalala.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a couple things to say. My grandparents left the Ottoman Empire because of what they were doing. They were Maronites. They were caught up in the Armenian Genocide. I grew up in a neighborhood with Armenians and Chaldeans and Maronites and Melkites, and my grandmother would weep when she talked about what had happened to her Armenian friends, but also to the Maronites in the Ottoman Empire. So I am proud to vote for this resolution, and I vote for all four of my grandparents who left the Ottoman Empire. They were lucky, but their friends and neighbors were not.
Mr. Sonia, okay. No further questions. So Mr. Smith and Mr. Engel, thank you very much. You are dismissed. And now we go to our final panel, Ms. Eshoo of California, who's been a long time supporter of this resolution, and we are grateful that she is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cole, and all of the members of the Rules Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify on H.Res.296 today. I don't come up to the Rules Committee very often, but anytime I have, I've always felt very welcome here. I'm here obviously in support of the bipartisan resolution. I think our two colleagues that just spoke really spoke eloquently and answered the many questions that you posed. I may be repeating some things, but I think that they're worth repeating. The resolution commemorates the Armenian Genocide.